The moment the man's eyes dropped to Ada Larkin's gloved right hand, she knew. She had seen that flicker on 100 faces across the years. The quick calculation, the recoil dressed up as politeness, and she had learned to keep her chin level through all of it. But she had come a very long way for this one, all the way from Missouri to the dusty depot at Rycross, on the strength of 6 careful letters, and so she made herself draw off the glove there on the platform, because a marriage ought not to begin with a thing hidden. The burn had taken her hand when she was 9, a kettle of boiling lye, a slick floor, a scream she still heard some nights, and the skin from her knuckles to her wrist was drawn and shining and marbled pale. It was a strong hand. It could sew a straight seam and gentle a horse and knead bread before dawn. But Harlan Pryor, the man who had written that he wanted a wife who was steady and plain and not afraid of work, looked at that hand as though she had offered him something dead. "You didn't say," he told her, and his voice carried down the platform to where the loungers sat. "In the letters. You didn't say you were marked." "I am steady," Ada said quietly, "and I am not afraid of work. Both of those are true." But he had already stepped back, and then back again, and he was shaking his head with the trapped, hunted look of a man who wants only to be somewhere else. "This won't do," he said. "This won't do at all. I'm sorry you came." And he turned on his heel and walked the length of the platform and down the steps and away up the street, leaving her standing beside her, one battered trunk with the whole idle depot watching, and the afternoon sun beating down, and no earthly place in the world to go. Ada did not cry. She would not give them that. She drew the glove slowly back over her hand and looked down the empty street where the man had gone and tried to make her mind work through the cold arithmetic of it. The fare spent, the last of her money spent, the little rented room in Missouri already let to another woman. She was still standing so, straight-backed and dry-eyed and utterly alone, when a shadow fell across her trunk, and a low voice said, "Ma'am." Cole Redfern had been shoeing a horse at the livery across from the depot when the stage came in, and he had seen the whole of it, had seen the pretty travel-worn woman step down full of hope, seen her bare her hand like a soldier laying down a sword, seen that fool Pryor look at a good strong hand, and see nothing but the scar on it. Cole had set down his tools somewhere in the middle of it. He had buried his wife 2 years back, and he knew the shape of a person standing in the wreck of a life, and he could not for the life of him keep still and watch her stand in it alone. "Ma'am," he said again. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders from the forge, with soot worked permanent into the creases of his hands, and a face that did not smile easily. She looked up at him warily, braced for whatever new unkindness this was. "I couldn't help seeing," he said. "That was a poor way for a man to act. However he wrote it, however he changed his mind, a man doesn't leave a woman standing on a platform with her trunk. That's not how it's done, not here." "It appears to be exactly how it is done here," Ada said, and there was steel in it, and Cole found he liked the steel. "No, ma'am," he said, "it isn't." He looked at the trunk, and at her, and made up his mind the way he made up his mind about everything, plainly and all at once. "My name's Cole Redfern. I keep the smithy at the end of this street. My Mary passed 2 winters ago, and I've a house that's too quiet, and a girl of 6 who could stand to have somebody in it that isn't a rough old blacksmith who doesn't know how to braid hair." He took a breath. "I've no right to ask it, and I know how it sounds. But you've come all this way, and you've nowhere to be, and I'd rather offer it clumsy than not offer it at all. There's honest work at my place, and honest wages, and a room that locks from the inside, and no expectation from me but that you'd be treated decent. The rest, if there ever was a rest, that'd be yours to say. Only yours, however long it took." Ada studied him a long moment. She had learned, in a hard life, to read men quickly, and what she read in this big, sooty man was not pity, which she could not have borne, but something plainer and steadier, a simple refusal to walk past a wrong. "You'd take in a stranger," she said slowly, with a marked hand, "that a man just threw over in front of the whole town. I'd take in a woman who bared that hand to a fool rather than start on a lie," Cole said. "That told me more about you than 6 letters could have told him." He bent and took up the handle of her trunk. "It's not charity, ma'am, if that's your worry. I'll work you fair hard, but I'll not have you sleep in the street to save that man's pride." She let him carry the trunk. It was the first thing anyone had carried for her in a very long time. Cole's daughter was named Nell, and she took one look at Ada in the doorway and hid behind her father's leg, and then crept out again by supper time because Ada, without a word about it, had drawn off her glove at the table so the child could look her fill. Nell looked. Then she reached out one small finger and touched the shining skin, grave as a doctor, and said, "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore," Ada told her. "Not for a long time now." "It's smooth," Nell said, wondering, and that was the whole of it, and something in Ada's chest that had been clenched tight since the platform came quietly loose. She kept house for them through that first summer, and it was, as Cole had promised, honest hard work, and he paid her honest wages and touched his hat to her, and never once so much as brushed her hand without her leave. But a house tells the truth about the people in it. Ada saw how he sat up late mending Nell's broken toys by lamplight because the child cried over them. Cole saw how Ada braided the little girl's hair each morning with that marked hand, patient and sure, and how Nell began to run to her and not away. He saw how Ada squared her shoulders every single time she went into town, ready for the whispers, and how she never once let them bend her. He thought she was the bravest person he had ever known, and one evening in the fall he nearly said so and lost his nerve. There was a night in late summer that neither of them ever spoke of afterward, but neither ever forgot. Nell took a fever, sudden and high, the way it came in children, and by midnight she was burning and wandering in her talk, and Cole stood over her cot, with his big helpless hands hanging at his sides, a man who could bend iron and could do nothing at all for his own child. It was Ada who moved. She stripped the blankets and bathed the small hot body with cool cloths through the whole black middle of the night, and steeped willow bark she'd had the sense to lay by, and held the girl through the worst of it, singing low, that marked hand smoothing the damp hair back from the flushed little face over and over. Cole kept the fire and fetched water and did as she told him, and watched her, and somewhere in that endless night the last wall in him came down. When the fever broke gray toward dawn and Nell slept at last, natural and easy, Ada looked up and found Cole looking at her, and there were tracks down through the soot on his face that had nothing to do with the forge. "I don't know what I'd have done," he said, hoarse, "if you hadn't come, if that fool hadn't." He stopped. He could not finish it, that the cruelest thing a man ever did to Ada had been the thing that put her under this roof on this night. "I've thought it 100 times, he said instead, "that his walking off was the luckiest turn of my whole life. I'm ashamed to think it, but I think it." Ada, worn to the bone and holding his sleeping daughter, found she could not be sorry either. "Then we'll neither of us be ashamed of it," she said softly, and he nodded, and did not trust himself to say more. After that, things were different, in the small ways that are the true ones. He began to leave the forge early. She began to keep his supper warm without being asked, and to sit up with him while he ate it. On Sundays he took to walking her and Nell out along the creek, and once he found a curl of wild honeysuckle and, after a good deal of internal struggle plainly visible on his face, tucked it into the ribbon at her collar, and turned red as iron in the fire, and pretended great interest in the far hills. Ada wore it until it wilted, and then pressed it in the family Bible, where he found it years later and had to go outside for a while. She learned the smithy too in those weeks, because she was not a woman to sit idle, and because she liked to watch him work. She learned to pump the great bellows and to hold the tongs steady while he hammered, that marked hand gripping the iron without a tremor near the heat that had once marked it, and Cole marveled at her, that she of all people would choose to stand beside a forge and its fire and never flinch. "Doesn't it trouble you?" he asked her once, nodding at the coals. "The fire?" And Ada considered it and said, "Fire took something from me once, when I was small and couldn't stop it. But I'm not small now, and this fire does honest work, and I'd sooner stand next to it than be afraid of it my whole life." Cole thought about that answer for a long time, and the more he thought about it, the more certain he became of what he wanted, and the more afraid he was to ask and be refused. The whispers did come. Rycross was a small town, and Harlan Pryor was in it, and he did not care to be reminded of what he had done, and so he told it the other way, that the woman was strange, was marked, was likely worse, and that Cole Redfern had taken her in for reasons a decent man wouldn't name. Ada heard it at the mercantile, plain, from two women who did not trouble to lower their voices. She went home white and steady, and told Cole at supper, because she would not have it hidden, that the talk might hurt his trade, and that she would go if he wished it, and that he had only to say so. Cole set down his fork very carefully. Then he stood, and got his hat, and for one terrible moment, Ada thought she had her answer. But he went out and up the street to the mercantile porch where the men gathered of an evening, and there, in front of the whole town, in front of Harlan Pryor, he said his piece. He was not a man of many words, and he did not use many. He said that Ada Larkin was under his roof and his protection. He said that any man who had something to say about her character could say it to Cole's face and settle it there, and that any man who had run off and left a good woman on a platform had best keep his opinions on womanhood to himself for the rest of his natural life. Then he said one thing more, and he said it looking straight at Pryor, but loud enough for all of them. "I'm going to ask that woman to marry me," Cole Redfern said. "Not because she's got nowhere to go. She's earned her keep 3 times over, and could keep house for any man in this county. I'm going to ask her because she's the finest woman ever stepped off that stage, and the smartest thing I'll do in this life is if she says yes. And that hand you're all so busy talking about." His jaw tightened. "I'd take that hand over any soft, useless pair of hands in this town, and be proud to." It got very quiet on the mercantile porch. Then old Doc Weatherby, who had no patience for cruelty, and a long memory for it, began to clap, slow and deliberate, and 1 or 2 others took it up, and Harlan Pryor found the porch a very poor place to be, and removed himself from it. Cole did not know Ada had followed him. She was standing at the foot of the steps, and she had heard all of it, and when he turned and saw her there, his face went red, as his own forge coals. He came down the steps to her, twisting his hat in his soot-dark hands, all his fine words gone. "I meant to ask you proper," he said, "at home, with Nell asleep, not shouting it on a porch like a fool." "I know," Ada said. Her eyes were wet at last, but she was smiling, and she reached up with her marked right hand, bare, and laid it flat against his rough cheek, and let it stay there in front of God and Rycross and everyone. "Ask me anyway." So he did, right there in the street, and she said yes before he had finished, and Nell, when they told her, declared it the best thing that had ever happened, and asked if she might now call Ada mother, which settled the last of it. They were married before the first snow. Ada Redfern stood up beside her blacksmith with her right hand bare and unashamed, and when he took it in his own great scarred hand to hold it, she understood at last that the mark had never once been the point. The point was the woman who had worn it, and had come 1,000 miles, and had bared it rather than lie, and had, in the end, been seen entire by the one man whose seeing mattered. Years later, Nell grown and gone to a home of her own, folks in Rycross who had forgotten how it all began would remark on how the blacksmith's wife braided her granddaughter's hair with such patient, tender care, that shining marked hand moving sure through the fine soft strands. And Cole, gray at the forge but strong yet, would watch her from the doorway of an evening and think, as he had thought every day of that long good life, that a fool had once looked at the best thing on that platform and walked away, and left it, whole and shining for him.